Suzanne's Paparazzi Jewelry, 24/7 shopping available. 160920 is the code. Show her some love, like she showed us.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Coast to Coast Entertainment Network. I am Ace and you're watching another episode of the Coast to Coast Red Tape Files. Let me introduce to you tonight my two co-hosts, of course, our newest addition on the show. Joanna, how you doing tonight?
Hey guys, how I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Not too bad. Getting ready to get the show kicked off. It's a very interesting case, I can tell you that. And then of course my partner in crime here, Mr. Mess Around Dave. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. I got a nap in today, so while we're sitting ready to do this thing.
Naps are awesome. Can't deny it. Naps are awesome. All right, so as in typical fashion here, Mess Around, you get to go ahead and introduce our case for this evening.
Okay, so tonight we are talking about the disappearance of Eugene John Herbert. He was an American-born Jesuit missionary in Sri Lanka. He, along with his Tamini driver, Belton Francis, disappeared on August 15th, 1990.
All right, I will go ahead and kick this portion over to Joanna, and you can go ahead and kind of give us your first initial thoughts and kind of what you went over and what you found so far.
Yeah, I think that this case is pretty complex. I think that for me, the fact that it was surrounded with the civil rights movement actually in Sri Lanka and in the midst of a civil war, I tend to believe that it was politically motivated, that both he and his driver were targeted and I suspect that they were murdered because they had alienated one side of the war or another. I mean, and that's my thoughts. I mean, because there's really no trace of either one of them, which is, really difficult to do. If they were killed on the side of the road during the war or something, I think that they were probably kidnapped, tortured, and then murdered.
Well, if you also remember, though, too, I don't know if you saw this part or not, but there was also 3 other preachers and ministers that kind of disappeared around that same time. So that's kind of what made me think, okay, with everything that was going on around there, somebody was targeting priests or ministers. And so I'm kind of thinking that this is the same thing that happened to him. But let me back up for 1 second here, because Mess Around, you're kind of talking about this before we went live here, and we're talking about several things that he did in his life. He kind of did a lot of things in his life. One of them was actually being a basketball coach.
Right. It says he was born October 9th, 1923, joined the Jesuits on August 14th at the age of 17. After completion of his Jesuit studies, he volunteered for the Sri Lanka mission. He was accepted and bribed in September 48 after serving here in the eastern township of Bada. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that name because it's just going to butcher it. And then another in some other town I can't pronounce. At the Jesuit college, he went to Panola, India for study of theology. He was ordained a priest on March 24th, 1954. So, yeah, he did a lot in his life. How he disappeared, it doesn't really say, but I tend to agree with Joanne. It was like a bunch of he was targeted for some reason or another due to alienating somebody.
Yeah, the interesting fact is him and his driver disappeared on a motorcycle. That's what got me. This wasn't like a typical, okay, he was in a car and they found a car. No, it was in a motorcycle, and there's like no trace of nothing. That was the more interesting. That was the more interesting part to me. And the other interesting part to me was that he made it to his destination going there, but he didn't make it back to his home where he was headed. That's the other thing that got me, is he disappeared on the way back home. So from whatever he did to kind of try and get peace between these two places he was going to, it makes me think that somebody didn't like what he was doing as far as his peace offering stuff, and that's why he disappeared. So, Joanna, I'll go back to you for some other thoughts.
Well, I read in one account, I read a few accounts about him, and I don't know if you guys had read this, that a fellow Jesuit priest said that this is what he thinks happened. And I'll read the quote. He said there was, I don't know if you know, his driver was actually just a student. And, the priest said there was somewhere who took exception to this Tamil boy and tried to take him away. Father Hebert, being what he was, defended the boy to his death. I mean, that's an entirely different theory. I tend to think that that's probably not it. Who knows, though? I mean, that could be true as well. But, they say that it was a savage civil war. I tend to think it's still the war twist or the war connection. But, if that's the kind of man he was, perhaps that's always a possibility as well. He was defending the boy, but you would have thought that one of their bodies would have been found in that instance, but
or something. There would have been some kind of clue, but like it was like disappearing without trace. The interesting thing is like nobody saw anything. Like nobody has anything. There's nobody to talk to as far as like witnesses. There's no key people in this right now that they're looking at that's saying this person could have done it, this person could have done it, or whatever. They have nothing. And so, Mess Around, I'll go to you now.
Yeah, I also read that the Sri Lankan government, they believe that he was killed by the rebel LTTE who were active around the area at the time of his disappearance. This apparently was in response to a written request for explanation by local American embassy. So, they think he was killed by the rebels.
That's interesting because I did not see that portion of it. I was trying to find that portion, or I was trying to find more information, and I just didn't see a whole lot. I didn't see the rebels portion of it. But I know that he was a well-known person, that he even has a statue of him. They put a statue up of him, and it's not ringing a bell exactly where the statue is placed, but that's how well known he was. The type of peacemaker he was, so to say. So, Joanne, now we'll go back to you.
Well, by all accounts, he was very well liked, and he had a strong conviction that he would be safe. But I believe that it was just a day or two before that a different priest had been stoned to death, and Father Hebert said to a few of his colleagues, other priests, that sooner or later one or all of us are going to be killed as well. So I think that he probably knew the risk, but it's just like anything, there's a risk to driving in a car, but we all do it because we just presume we're going to be safe. And he probably had that same sense of conviction and didn't think it would be him. But I believe that it probably was him. And they probably hid his body. In my belief, they probably hid his body because he was so popular, and there would have been an uprising. There probably would have been an uprising by his followers. Even the army, one side was fond of him, but he had been detained on the suspicion that he had been aiding the guerrillas of the Liberation Tiger. So, who knows? But I tend to think it's politically motivated.
Yeah, so my question is, do you think that potentially, and you kind of touched a little bit on it, but do you think that the driver could have had anything to do with this disappearance whatsoever?
That's always possible, but I tend to think not. It sounds like that young person was devoted to him, and if he had been, he would have resurfaced. He would have resurfaced somewhere by now, so many years later. And if he had, they probably murdered him too. They probably manipulated him and But it's not like he was hiding, and that they would have. He was, a nurse had seen him earlier, the two of them earlier in the day, just riding around on the scooter. So I don't think he would have been hard to find. So he probably didn't need anyone to bring him out into the open. He freely traveled and had no inhibitions, it sounded like.
All right, mess around.
Yeah, I was reading a little more on this, and I guess the local Jesuits, such as Harry Miller, believe that a mob of civilians may have waylaid and killed Herbert and Bertram Francis and destroyed any evidence of the crime. And they also believe that he's definitely dead due to foul play.
Well, at this point in time, when you look at the whole situation right now and think about the complete disappearance, that you have no clue, you haven't heard anything about the driver, you haven't heard anything about Hebert in so long, and when somebody just disappears, the first thing you think about is foul play. That's typically what
Right.
immediately comes to mind as foul play. Whether who was involved on the foul play, that's kind of where we're trying to figure it out right now. Maybe it was a mob. Maybe it could have just been one individual person that was attacking priests and ministers, so to say. That's kind of where the whole suspicion comes into play. And that's where it makes me think that if they're traveling, I don't know if they were on a busy street or what. That's what I don't know. It doesn't even really say what time of day he disappeared. All they're saying is he was just like up and vanished without trace. When you think that somebody would have seen something, so it makes me I don't know. That's kind of where I was confused. Is like somebody would have seen something. So Joanne.
So the priest, his colleague, was Father Henry. I think it was Harry Miller or Henry Miller. I'm not sure, but he released a documentary, and in his documentary, he said there were actually disappearances were rife in eastern Sri Lanka, and they had recorded 8,000 cases of missing persons, and their bodies were never found. No investigations were ever conducted, and mothers would report that their sons and young Tamil boys were often the target, these students. And they would say that they would go out and the mothers would say they never came back. So perhaps the boy was the target, and Father Hebert was just, collateral damage. I mean, that's always a possibility as well.
Yeah, that definitely could have been the thing of like wrong place, wrong time, and them not knowing maybe they didn't know who he was. Like you said, the driver was there, like, oh, this person's with the driver, so we have to take him too. I mean that definitely could be a huge possibility. Because right now it's like you're kind of throwing darts in the dark at this point in time. You kind of throw them anyway to try and figure out exactly what happened. There's a few theories. There's not a ton. All right, mess around. How about you?
Yeah, there's so many different theories as to what happened to these two individuals. And nobody's probably never going to know what happened to them. They did, like Joanne said, it could have been the boy that was targeted, and he was just in the way and wrong place, wrong time, like you said. So, it's one of those things that I think is never going to be solved.
I really wish with this one, there was more to go on. I'm like sitting here saying, I don't really know even where to start with this, because of the simple fact there's just not a whole lot out there except for just the disappearance. And we kind of know where he was in his life, what he did in his life, how much he meant to people. And we know kind of relatively around the time he disappeared, trying to travel back home. That's the only part we know. Other than that, we don't really know much of anything else. So, Joanne, I don't know if you have any more facts that we don't have, but go ahead.
Well, going back, and the boy's mother actually offer, Yeah, he was 2014, I believe. Well, maybe not in 1990. So in I'm trying to figure out, see what the boy's mother actually sent him with Father Hebert because he was so well liked. She said it would be like traveling with God, and she believed that he would be safe with him. And I think that they were just going to the next town, and then that's when they didn't make it to their destination. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to see. I thought I saw that, but it's really heartbreaking. So I think part of the reason we don't have any, of course, it's in Sri Lanka, and during the height of a civil war, they probably didn't have much of a police presence, and there were no police reports. So typically, if it's in this country, we have the police report. There are always some type of witness, but of course, it was a long time ago, and they don't have the follow-up that we have here, and that probably plays all into it. So it says he disappeared on August 5th, 1990, and he was actually seen as a protector of students and young men at risk of disappearance and recruitment into the army. And it says, in a cruel twist of fate, he himself disappeared. So, and they were actually going to the Jesuit mission, I believe. And then
Yeah. What makes me wonder is like when we look at this case, because you know how some cases get reopened and they want to go back and they kind of want to reopen cases. In a case like this, I don't even know if you reopened a case where you would even start.
Right.
So, and you're kind of, I guess, in the field you've been in for a little while. Like, do you feel like this is a case that they could kind of potentially reopen at some point and kind of look at? Because they have nothing to go off of.
Right. There'd be no DNA to test. They did actually take a look at the case again in 2014 when the documentary was released, but there's just nothing. And think about it. When we're talking about 8,000 disappearance, it's and I hate to even reflect on this, but think about when the World Trade Center, when we were sifting through the debris looking for 3,000 bodies, just even a tiny trace, and that was in a contained area, and it just took it took a decade. I mean, we were still recovering DNA evidence 10 years later. It's possible, but that wasn't a preserved environment. 8,000 bodies that they probably callously disregarded, and just trying to, even if they were to find mass graves or remains, it's unlikely it's going to be opened at this point. And even if it were, I find it incredibly hard to believe there would be any trace of evidence worthy of examination at this late date.
Yeah, because like if they had some kind of weapon, if they had some kind of DNA, like you said, if they had some kind of witnesses, like anybody who could step forward and say anything, then potentially, yeah, this could be a case that they could definitely reopen, examine, and see where they could go with it. But I completely agree with you when you're talking about 80,000 people. That's a lot of people. That isn't no short little bit of maybe 100 people. When it's 80,000, something is definitely going on there.
So it's actually 8,000, not 80. That's significant.
8,000, sorry, yeah. 8,000, yeah. So you have 8,000 people who are disappearing, which it's like you said, you have no traces of them whatsoever. You have no idea what's happening. And then now he ends up disappearing with his driver with absolutely no trace. So could there be like one giant mob around there that could be involved in this disappearance? Who knows at this point? That's kind of where I'm kind of agree with you on how you would even go about reopening a case like this. I look at this going, I don't really think you could.
And another component is typically cases are reopened at the request or the insistence or the persistent pleas of family members. And he was a priest, so he wasn't married. He was actually, I don't know how old he was at the time, I forget, but I think he was a little bit older. So his parents are probably deceased. There's no mention of siblings. So nobody seems to be advocating or fighting for the case to be reopened. So unless, and it's hard to open the case. I'm sure Sri Lanka isn't compelled to open a case for a foreign, he's a visitor to that country. He's not even, a citizen. And, so they're much less likely, I would believe, to open for really somebody who's just passing through.
Yes, the documentary is definitely something that I kind of want to check out. It makes me wonder if you can find it on like Netflix or something like that. Did you happen to catch where you can watch it at?
I didn't, but it's called The Story of One. So
The Story of One. Okay.
One. So we can, I don't know, Chris behind the scenes can take a peek, but
Absolutely.
see where it is. Or I'll look it up while we're.
All right. Mess around.
Yeah, I was right there, Joanne, when she was talking about the World Trade Center, which talking about all the missing people from there. My mind went directly to that too. Like, you can't find all those people. You're not gonna be able to find, traces of somebody's gone for that long. I mean, I don't know. This case was kind of, there was nothing there, and I don't think you can reopen it. And I agree with Joanne. Like the government over there is not really interested because he wasn't a citizen, so they could probably care less about reopening it because he wasn't a citizen. But I just want to say hi to William. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, you definitely think but that's kind of a bad way to think, though. Like, you would think that even if he wasn't a citizen there, even if you can somehow help out trying to figure out what happened to him and his driver, you would think that they would want to help.
Well, if he was a citizen, it'd probably be more of a priority. But since he's not, I don't think it is. Like, I don't know. I just don't think they care much because he's not a citizen. If he was, and not only that, there's just not a whole lot to go on anyway. So it'd be a waste of time to reopen it up when they have little to go on anyway. So
yeah, but they already had 8,000 other people who disappeared over there. Like, they would know that they have a problem. Like, they had a problem. And so you would think that they would want to look at that and be like, okay, so since we're trying to find any clues about these 8,000 people who disappeared, maybe we can potentially get a clue and maybe figure out and help them figure out where Edward had disappeared. So, Joanne, I'll turn this back over to you.
I think to your point, though, think about that when you have 8,000 people who were missing, and I would have to believe that some of the citizens of the country are pressuring the government to open the cases for their family members. Mm-hmm. So even if they were to open any of those cases, I would assume that they would open those that were close to home, and it would probably be easier, right? Because they would have relatives and friends, and people are always willing to come forward, typically for people who they know and love. But if there are 8,000 disappearances too, that's a lot of people. So all of the witnesses may very well have been killed themselves or died in the war. I mean, that's what we're talking over 30 years ago. It'd be interesting to know how many people were killed in the wars over there in the Civil War. If we just know of 8,000 disappearances, it's probably, many thousands more people who were killed in the war as well. So,
well, yeah, and going back to your point for a second, if there was any witnesses around, and let's say, when they killed Edward and his driver, you would definitely be like, okay, so these individuals were killed. If there was witnesses, then obviously they're going to dispose of those witnesses too. They're obviously not going to leave anybody around. Now, I'm not saying that the same people were the people who made these 8,000 people disappear. But in order for 8,000 people to disappear, you would have to think it would be some kind of mob type thing. There would have to be a huge, some kind of huge party of people that would have to be involved in doing it, not just 2 or 3 people.
Right. So I believe it was probably the army, right? One side of the army. That really is the only way that you could 8,000 people could disappear. It was, so that's why I believe it's politically motivated.
And you know what? You're probably not wrong. Like that's
You're probably not. You're probably getting it right on the head.
and so at some point, that's probably why they're kind of just like, okay, let it go, because that's probably what it was. They probably even feel, yeah, it's politically motivated. You know, that's probably what happened. It would not shock me. Now, if something happened like that in today's world, I feel like we would be able to figure it out a little bit more because of the more detailed stuff we have and
the technology and everything.
Yeah, and all the technology. I feel like we would at least be able to find maybe a 1,000 of those people who disappeared, who would probably lead to even more just because of what we have today. But
Agreed. I mean, think about it now. Even in Ukraine, when we're thinking of the war there, and people are buried under the rubble, and people are missing, and we have the technology is so enhanced now, right? We have equipment that can sense body heat under the ground and see where these mass graves are. Because think about 8,000 people, there have to be mass graves somewhere. There's no and there's no way that we're not burying one person at a time for 8,000 graves. So there has to be mass burials, and I believe that at some point that may be the hope. That may be the hope that somewhere in Sri Lanka's history, in generations to come, that those graves will be unearthed. And then maybe it will be recovered, and then DNA evidence. It's interesting. I'm wondering too, what is the economic state of Sri Lanka? I believe I believe they're somewhat impoverished. I'm not sure, so they may not have the resources either to open an investigation of that scale.
Yeah, and honestly, that's a good question. I haven't heard much about Sri Lanka, so I don't know. Nobody ever really talks about them.
No.
So that's actually a very good question, because if there's usually a country and stuff that's in poverty, people talk about it. So right now you're looking at this going, I have no idea if they're in poverty, if they have a lot of money over there. I don't know. What is their military like?
It's a good point. They may not have the resources to do the things that we do here,
And it's a small island. I don't know if you guys know that, but it's a small island off of South Asia. So it's not even a big. So it's funny that they're in the news right now. It's in the verge of. It's in the verge of a humanitarian emergency with hundreds boarding boats set for Australia. So. Because it's the country's economic crisis has worsened, with people smugglers claiming those on board will be allowed into Australia and other countries to work and live. So, yeah, they're in dire straits. So it's very unlikely. That's the last thing on their mind, worrying about what happened to people 32 years ago. They're probably worried about the people today.
Which makes sense. Well, since we're at that time now, we'll kind of give our final thoughts here and kind of do a little final wrap up. So mess around. I'll go ahead and start with you.
Yeah. After hearing that, they don't care about something that happened 30 years ago. They're worried about today and how they're going to make it through this week and the day, the month, the year, limited resources, they're in poverty. So this thing's never going to get solved. Hopefully next week we have a better case for you.
All right. And then Joanna.
Hi, Judge. It's good to be back behind the camera and to see you handsome gentlemen tonight. So I think it was an interesting case. I didn't know if we were going to have a lot to talk about, but we really did, right? We talked about government, global affairs, and we learned a little bit about Sri Lanka we didn't know before. So
right.
Our thoughts and best wishes are to the Heber family, but also to the families who are struggling there today as well.
Absolutely. So we definitely want to thank everybody for watching. It's been another great episode. Next week, we'll have another great episode for you in another case. So with that, We hope everybody has a fantastic night, and we'll see you next Monday for another episode of the Red Tape Files.